Welcome back to the C-Files, folks, and welcome back to Science versus Evolution. What I'm doing is I'm going through a book called, in the beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood by Walt Brown, PhD, a scientist and engineer who wrote the book with the help of other scientists. And it just gives scientific facts. I know that people who have presuppositional worldview toward Darwinian evolution, this might upset them because it challenges their presuppositions. But whatever your take is on this, just remember, all I'm doing in the book, or all he's doing in the book that I'm reading, is giving scientific facts. And you can take those facts and you can uh, view them in the manner that you're going to choose to view them. I have no control over that. All I can do is give you the facts, and you can take it from there. So let's begin. We're going to be on page 5. We're going to start with Mendel's laws. All right, and here we go. Let me get this adjusted. There we go. Mendel's laws of genetics and their modern day refinements explain almost all physical variations observed in living things. Mendel discovered that genes, or units of heredity, are merely reshuffled from one generation to another. Get my book over here so I can really see it. Now, different combinations are formed, not different genes. Different combinations produce many varieties or many variations within each kind of life, such as in the dog family. A logical consequence of Mendel's laws is that there are limits to such variations or such variation. Breeding experiments and common observations have also confirmed these boundaries. So, what are these breeding experiments and observations? Well, we'll go back to the um, footnotes where he gives the scientific studies and so forth. So let's take a look at that. And under Mendel's laws, he says this. Monroe W. Strickberger, Genetics, second edition, New York, Macmillan Publishing Company, 1976, page 812. That's under the first statement. That's the reference of the first statement where he talks about the limits, the breeding experiments, and it shows limitations. He says Alfred Russel Wallace, who independently proposed the theory of organic evolution slightly before Charles Darwin, was opposed to Mendel's laws of genetics. Wallace knew Mendel's experiments showed that the general characteristics of an organism remained within distinct boundaries. In a letter to Dr. Archdahl Reed on 28 December 1909, Wallace wrote the following. On the general relation of Mendelism to evolution, I've come to a very definite conclusion. This is that it has no relation whatever to the evolution of species or higher groups, but is really antagonistic to such evolution. The essential basis of evolution, involving as it does the most minute and all-pervading adaptation to the whole environment, is extreme and ever-present plasticity as a condition of survival and adaptation. But the essence of Mendelian characters is their rigidity. They are transmitted without variation, and therefore, except by the rarest of accidents, can never become adapted to ever verifying conditions. And that's James Merchant, Letters and Reminiscences. New York, Harper and Brothers, 1916, page 340. Francis Hitching, under the second one, where he talks about breeding experiments. Francis Hitching, The Neck of the Giraffe, Where Darwin Went Wrong, New Haven, Connecticut, Ticknor and Fields, 1982, page 55. All competent biologists acknowledge the limited nature of the variation breeders can produce, although they do not like to discuss it much when grinding the evolutionary axe. And that's William R. Fix, The Bone Peddlers, Selling Evolution. New York, Macmillan Publishing Company, 1984, pages 184 and 185. Look, if this is boring to you, I apologize, but I have to give these references because with this type of subject matter, people will challenge that. So they can go look up these references. I'm sure maybe the internet has a lot of these. The next one is this quote: "A rule that all breeders recognize is that there are fixed limits to the amount of chains that can be produced." And that is Lane P. Lester and Raymond G. Boland, The Natural Limits to Biological Change, Grand Rapids Zondervan Publishing House, 1984, page 96. Norman Macbeth, Darwin Retired, An Appeal to Reason is the title. Ipswich, Massachusetts, Gambit, 1971, page 36. William J. Tinkle, Heredity. Houston, St. Thomas Press, 1967, page 55 through 56. And here's a quote: "The distinctions of specific forms and their not being blended together by innumerable transitional links is a very obvious difficulty." And that is Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species, 6th edition, New York, Macmillan Publishing Company, 1927, page 322. Now, if you're shocked to hear Darwin quoted, I will read the quote to you once again. "The distinctions of specific forms and they're not being blended together by innumerable transitional links is a very obvious difficulty." So he's acknowledging that this problem of Mendel's laws is an issue. Here's another quote by Michael Denton. Evolution, A Theory in Crisis is the book. London Burnett Books, 1985, page 105. Here's what it says. "Indeed, the isolation and distinctness of different types of organisms and the existence of clear discontinuities in nature have been self-evident for centuries, even to non-biologists." So that was under the section of Mendel's laws. Next section is going to be bounded variations, and it says this, and this is on page 6, number 4. "While Mendel's laws give a theoretical explanation why variations are limited, there is broad experimental verification as well. For example, if evolution happened, organisms, such as bacteria, that quickly produce the most offspring should have the most variations and mutations. Natural selection would then select the more favorable changes, allowing them to survive, reproduce, and pass on their beneficial genes. Organisms that have allegedly evolved the most should have traits that allowed them to progress the furthest, namely short production cycles and many offspring. We see the opposite. In general, more complex organisms, such as humans, have fewer offspring and larger reproduction cycles. Again, variations within existing organisms appear to be bounded. So the next section is 5, natural selection. Natural selection cannot produce new genes. It only selects among pre-existing characteristics. As the word selection implies, variations are reduced, not increased. For example, many have mistakenly believed that resistances evolved in response to pesticides and antibiotics. Sometimes a previously lost capability was reestablished, making it appear something evolved. Sometimes a mutation or variation damaging to the bacteria reduced the antibiotic's effectiveness even more. Sometimes a few resistant insects and bacteria were already present when the pesticides and antibiotics were first applied. When the vulnerable insects and bacteria were killed, resistant varieties. Let's get the tongue working. When the vulnerable insects and bacteria were killed, resistant varieties had less competition and therefore proliferated. While natural selection occurred, nothing evolved, and in fact, some biological diversity was lost. I'm going to give the footnotes here in a moment. I'm just going to read through this section, and we'll go back and hit the footnotes. The variations Darwin observed among finches on different Galapagos Islands, I can never say Galapagos Islands, is another example of natural selection producing micro, not macro evolution. While natural selection sometimes explains the survival of the fittest, it does not explain the origin of the fittest. Actually, natural selection prevents major evolutionary changes. Now, there is a lot of footnotes here. Let's go back to section 5 and start looking at footnotes. The first one had to do with selections among pre-existing characteristics. Ultimately, well, this is a quote. It's a long list on who quoted it. It's Ernst Mayr, Evolutionary Challenges to the Mathematical Interpretation of Evolution is the book. Mathematical Challenges to the Neo-Darwinian Interpretation of Evolution. Editors Paul S. Moorhead and Martin M. Kaplan. Proceedings of a symposium held at the Wistar Institute of Anatomy and Biology, 25 to 26 April 1966, Philadelphia, the Wistar Institute Press, 1967, page 50, if you want the reference. Ultimately, all variation is, of course, due to mutation. That's the quote. Now, the next one is shorter. Alla, page 63. Although mutation is the ultimate source of all genetic variation, it is a relatively rare event. Here's the next one. Theodosius Dobzhansky on methods of evolutionary biology and anthropology, American scientist. December 1957, page 385. The process of mutation is the only known source of the raw materials of genetic variability. And hence, of evolution, the mutations which arise are, with rare exceptions, deleterious to their carriers, at least in the environments which the species normally encounters. Just looking at the time. Okay, here we go. C.P. Martin, a non-geneticist, looks at evolution. American Scientist, January 1953, page 102. And the quote is this: accordingly, Mutations are more than just sudden changes in heredity. Again, it says, accordingly, mutations are more than just sudden changes in heredity. They also affect viability and, to the best of our knowledge, invariably affect it adversely. Not boding well for the common belief among society when it comes to evolution. Same publisher, page 103, says this: mutation does produce hereditary changes, but the massive evidence shows that all, or almost all, known mutations are unmistakably pathological, and the few remaining ones are highly suspect. And page 100, same book, same publisher. Although mutations have produced some desirable breeds of animals and plants, it says this: all mutations seem to be in the nature of injuries that, to some extent, impair the fertility and viability of the affected organisms. I doubt if among the many thousands of known mutation or mutant types, one can be found which is superior to the wild type of its normal environment. Only very few can be named which are superior to the wild type in a strange environment. The next one is, and there's a bunch of them here, a bunch of them for this section, and we'll just run through them. The next one is W.R. Thomas, Introduction to the Origin of Species, which was written by Charles Darwin. Sorry, the phone's trying to interrupt me. Everyman Library, number 811, New York, E.P. Dutton with a D and Sons, 1956. Reprint edition, Sussex, England, J.M. Dent and Sons, Limited, 1967, page 10. I know these are long references, but it's important for people who really want to check the references in the book, because people are skeptics, and anything that goes against their worldview, they really, they don't like it a whole lot. So they want to dismiss and, oh, you don't have any references and all that kind of stuff. Well, we have references, so you can look them up. It says this: if we say that, excuse me, if we say that it is only by chance that mutations, that is, are useful, we are still speaking too leniently. In general, they are useless, detrimental, or lethal. You see, one of the big things in Darwinian evolutionary theory is mutations and natural selection are really two of the main keys to the theory being successful. But there's a problem here, isn't there, with the mutations and natural selection. Visible mutations are easily detectable genetic changes, such as albinism, dwarfism, and hemophilia. Winchester qualifies the relative frequency of such types of mutations, and this is A.M. Winchester Genetics, book is Genetics, 5th edition, probably a textbook. Boston Houghton Mifflin Company, 1977, page 356. Here's the quote: lethal mutations outnumber visibles by about 20 to 1. Mutations that have small harmful effects, the detrimental mutations are even more frequent than the lethal ones. So, the question is, how do you get progression in evolution when mutations are harmful, not helpful? John W. Klotz Genes, Genesis, and Evolution, second edition, revised. St. Louis, Concordia Publishing House, 1972, page 262 through 265, if you want to read that. And that's in reference to, well, this is under B, which talks about rarely, if ever, is a mutation beneficial to an organism in its natural environment. Almost all observable mutations are harmful. Some are meaningless. Many are lethal. Um, did I do natural selection? I did not. So we will do that next. I think I skipped straight over mutations, which is a lot here. But we'll continue with mutations. I took a little trouble to find whether a single amino acid change in a hemoglobin mutation is known that doesn't affect seriously the function of that hemoglobin. One is hard put to find such an instance. That's George Wald, Mathematical Challenges to the Darwinian Interpretation of Evolution, editors Paul S. Moorhead and Martin M. Kaplan, page 18 through 19. However, evolutionists have taught for years that alpha hemoglobin A changed through mutations into beta hemoglobin A. This would require, at a minimum, 120 point mutations. In other words, the improbability Wald refers to above must be raised to the 120th power to produce just one protein. Even if we didn't have a great deal of data on this point, and the point has to do with, let me go back. It has to do with the rarity of mutations ever producing anything. Even if we didn't have a great deal of data on this point, we could still be quite sure on theoretical grounds that mutations would usually be detrimental. For mutation is a random change of a highly organized, reasonably smoothly functioning living body. A random change in the highly integrated system of chemical processes which constitute life is almost certain to impair it, just as a random interchange of connections in a television set is not likely to improve the picture. I'll get again, just as a random interchange of connections in a television set is not likely to improve the picture. And that's James F. Crow, professor of genetics, University of Wisconsin. You guys, you warriors in the comment section that want to argue that this is not science, we're quoting Darwin. We're quoting a professor of genetics at the University of Wisconsin. Are they not scientists? So before you become too quick to jump, I would say look before you leap. There might be a cliff there. Genetic effects of radiation, that was what he was discussing. A Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, Volume 14, January 1958, pages 19 through 20. Now this one is Sewall Wright. The statistical consequences of Mendelian heredity in relation to speciation. The New Systematics is the name of it. Editor Julian Huxley, London, Oxford University Press, 1949, page 174. Says this, here's a quote. The one systematic effect of mutation seems to be a tendency towards degeneration. Well, that's not good news for Darwin's theory. In discussing the many mutations needed to produce a new organ, Kostler says, each mutation occurring alone would be wiped out before it could be combined with the others. They are all independent. The doctrine that their coming together was due to a series of blind coincidences is an affront, not only to common sense, but to the basic principles of scientific explanation. Arthur Koestler, and it's called The Ghost in the Machine, and it's a New York Macmillan Publishing Company, 1968, page 129. A few more to go, and then we'll go through the natural selection ones. There is no single instance where it can be maintained that any of the mutations studied has a higher vitality than the mother species. That's in Heribert Nielsen, Synthetische Art, it says foreign language, Artbildung, and that's Lund, Sweden, Verlag, CWK Gleerup, 1953, page 1157. That one might be a tough reference to do. And his this next quote is from the same source on page 1186. It is therefore absolutely impossible to build a current evolution on mutations or on recombinations. Now this next one is Prairie Paul Grassi, Evolution of Living Organisms, New York, Academic Press, 1977, page 88, most likely a textbook. Here's the quote. No matter how numerous they may be, mutations do not produce any kind of evolution. All right, next one is Lynn Margulis, as quoted by Charles Mann. Lynn Margulis, Science's Unruly Earth Mother, and it's the magazine Science, or the publication Science, volume 252, April 1991, page 379. It says this, I have seen no evidence whatsoever that these evolutionary changes can occur through the accumulation of gradual mutations. I hope you guys are surviving this without punching out the computer screen. Computers can be quite expensive. Please don't punch your computer. It's not your computer's fault. It's not your computer's fault that this research and the science is producing this result. Richard B. Goldschmidt, Evolution as Viewed by One Geneticist. That's American Scientist publication, volume 40. January 1952, page 94, says this. It is true that nobody thus far has produced a new species or genus, etc., by macromutation. It is equally true that nobody has produced even a species by the selection of micromutations. The next one is, we got two more. Next one is Frank B. Solisbury, Plant Science Department, Utah State University. Natural Selection and the Complexity of the Gene. That's the title of the article. It's out of Nature magazine, volume 224, 25 October, 1969. Page 342. It says this. If life really depends on each gene being as unique as it appears to be, then it is too unique to come into being by chance mutations. The final quote is Michael Pittman, Adam and Evolution, London writer 1984, pages 67 through 68. Do we therefore ever see mutations going about the business of producing new structures for selection to work on? No nascent organ has ever been observed emerging, though their origin in pre-functional form is basic to evolutionary theory. Some should be visible today, occurring in organisms at various stages up to integration of a functional new system. But we don't see them. There is no sign at all of this kind of radical novelty. Neither observation nor controlled experiment has shown natural selection manipulating mutations so as to produce a new gene, hormone, enzyme, system, or organ. I'm going to go beyond 30 minutes on this one because I've got to go back into natural selection and do the footnotes on it. But let me read this section on mutations, and then we'll do that. It says mutations are the only known means by which new genetic material becomes available for evolution. It can only be done through mutations. Rarely, if ever, is a mutation beneficial to an organism in its natural environment. Almost all observable mutations are harmful. Some are meaningless, many are lethal. No known mutation has ever produced a form of life having greater complexity and viability than its ancestors. Now let's go back to natural selection. I'll just go through it once more because we may have forgotten it, and we'll hit some footnotes. Natural selection cannot produce new genes. It only selects among pre-existing characteristics. Let's talk about that one. Natural selection may have a stabilizing effect, but it does not promote speciation. It is not a creative force, as many people have suggested. Now, that is a quote from Daniel Brooks, as quoted by Roger Lewin, and the title is A Downward Slope to Greater Diversity. And that's from Science Magazine, folks. Volume 217, 24 September 1982, page 1240. The next one is Gizi Opadia Kadima. How the Slot Machine Led Biologists Astray. What a cool title that is. That's a Journal of Theoretical Biology, and it's volume 124, 1987. Page is 127 to 135. And then there's and that one's connected to B, which says this. As the word selection implies, variations are reduced, not increased. For example, many have mistakenly believed that resistances evolved in response to pesticides and antibiotics. Sometimes a previously lost capability was reestablished, making it appear something evolved. That's what it's referring to. And that was the reference there. Another reference for that one. Well, for C, here's a reference for C. And C says this. Sometimes a mutation or variation damaging to the bacteria reduce the antibiotic's effectiveness even more. And that references Eric Penrose. Bacterial resistance to antibiotics, a case of unnatural selection. Creation Research Society Quarterly, Volume 35, September 1998, pages 76 through 83. Here's the next quote for D, and D is this. Um, Sometimes a few resistant insects and bacteria. I'm gonna have to quit here in a moment. My throat's really getting dry. Just a moment. Oh boy, it went down my windpipe. I know some of you guys are saying, serves you right. You're probably so angry at me right now. Now, here we go. Sometimes a few resistant insects and bacteria were already present when the pesticides and antibiotics were first applied. Please excuse me. Hmm. Must be evolution making me cough like that. Yeah, it's got to be. All right. When the vulnerable insects and bacteria were killed, resistant varieties had less competition and therefore proliferation. And that's D. Let's go to D. Here's a quote. Um, Francisco J. Ayala. This is the mechanisms of evolution in Scientific American, in the magazine or the scientific publication, volume 239, September 1978, page 65. It says this: the genetic variations required for resistance to the most diverse kinds of pesticides were apparently present in every one of the populations exposed to these man-made compounds. It also says this. This is Rick McGuire, Erie Human Arctic Fossils Yield Resistant Bacteria, Medical Tribune publication. And it's 29 December 1988, page 1, very first page. It says this: well-preserved bodies of members of the Franklin expedition, frozen in the Canadian Arctic in 1945, contained bacteria resistant to antibiotics. Because antibiotics began to be developed in the early 1940s, these resistant bacteria could not have evolved in response to antibiotics. Contamination has been eliminated as a possibility. The next quotation is Soren Lothrup. The title is Darwinism, the Refutation of a Myth. It's New York, Cromhelm, 1987, pages 274 to 275. Quote, Darwin complained that his critics did not understand him. But he did not seem to realize that almost everybody, friends, supporters, and critics, agreed on one point. His natural selection cannot account for the origin of the variations, only for their possible survival. And the reasons for rejecting Darwin's proposal were many. But first of all, that many innovations cannot possibly come into existence through accumulation of many small steps, and even if they can, natural selection cannot accomplish it because incipient and immediate stages are not advantageous. We have only a few more, and then we'll finish up the video. So this next one is Michael J. Behe, one of my favorites. One of my favorite biologists. Molecular Machines, Cosmic Pursuit. Spring, that's the title, Molecular Machines, Cosmic Pursuit. Spring of 1998, page 35. Quote, it was a shock to the people of the 19th century when they discovered, from observations science had made, that many features of the biological world could be ascribed to the elegant principle of natural selection. It is a shock to us in the 20th century to discover, from observations science has made, that the fundamental mechanisms of life cannot be ascribed to natural selection, and therefore were designed. but we must deal with our shock as best as we can and go on. The theory of undirected evolution is already dead, but the work of science continues. The next quote here is it says for F. Let's go to F and then we'll finish it up. So F is this. While natural selection occurred, nothing evolved, and in fact, some biological diversity was lost. The variations Darwin observed among finches on different Galapagos islands, excuse me, is another example of natural selection producing micro, not macro evolution. While natural selection sometimes explains the survival of the fittest, it does not explain the origin of the fittest. And that took me to E, and then actually, natural selection prevents major evolutionary changes. So we'll do E and F. Well, we just did E. E was we just the quote by Soren Lovetrip and Michael Behe were E. Now we're in F. In 1980, the Macroevolution Conference was held in Chicago. Roger Lewin, writing for Science magazine, or publication, described it as a turning point in the history of evolutionary theory, end quote. He went on to say this. The central question of the Chicago Conference was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution can be extrapolated to explain the phenomena of macroevolution. At the risk of doing violence to the positions of some of the people at the meeting, the answer can be given as a clear no. And the reference there is Roger Lewin, Evolution Theory Under Fire. That's the title. It's a publication in Science magazine, or Science publication. Volume 210. It was 21st of November, 1980, and it's on page 883. Two more, and then we're done. The next one is the same publication that we just quoted, and it's page 884 versus page 883. Quote, in a generous admission, Francis Ayala, it's Ayala, if you want to know the spelling, a major figure in propounding the modern synthesis neo-Darwinism. But let me go back without the parentheses, without the brackets here. Let's do it again. In a generous admission, Francis Ayala, a major figure in propounding the modern synthesis in the United States, said, we would not have predicted stasis. That's the stability of species over time, from population genetics. But I am now convinced from what the paleontologists say that small changes do not accumulate. And then finally, the final quote. Well, let me go back. It says this, as stated earlier, micro plus time does not equal macro. So there you go. This is the final one. It's Michael Thomas, Stasis Considered is the title, Origins Research publication, volume 12, fall/winter 1989, and that's page 11. Here's the quote. One could argue at this point that such minor changes, microevolution, extrapolated over millions of years, could result in macroevolutionary change. But the observational evidence will not support this argument. Thus, the changes observed in the laboratory are not analogous to the sort of changes needed for macroevolution. Those who argue from microevolution to macroevolution may be guilty, then, of employing a false analogy, especially when one considers that microevolution may be a force of stasis, produces stability, not transformation. For those, I knew my throat was going to get me. Okay, here we go. For those who must describe the history of life as a purely natural phenomenon, the winnowing action of natural selection is truly a difficult problem to overcome. For scientists who are content to describe accurately those processes and phenomena which occur in nature, in particular stasis, natural selection acts to prevent major evolutionary change. Now, folks, okay, I'm ending on the bottom of page 43. I need to say that so that I can remember where I was. I'm going into mutations. I did mutations. Um, we'll read through mutations again next time. No, I did all these. Okay. We'll go to fruit flies. It'll be the bottom of page 6, fruit flies on the next one. Folks, these are Darwin in his book. These are evolutionary scientists writing in the scientific publications. These are the quotes I'm giving you. I'm not giving you some pie in the sky stuff here. I'm giving you what the actual evolutionary scientists are saying. I'm giving you the actual facts of biological science out of the book here. So you can argue that what I'm reading here is not science if you want. But if you do, what you're telling me is that what these evolutionary scientists are saying is not science. So make that argument if you want, but you're really kind of biting yourself in the tail end if you do that, and you're an evolutionist. Um, you may disagree with your fellow evolutionist on this, and that's fine if that's what you're going to do. But don't make the claim that this is not scientific fact. It is. And now you've heard it. And now you've got to decide what you're going to do with it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on the C-Files.